It's more than just another radio show. It's a beacon of truth. Fasten your seatbelt and find out why they call Deacon Harold Burke-Sivers the dynamic deacon. Join Deacon Harold for a fast-paced hour that sheds encouraging light on today's culture. Welcome to Beacon of Truth with your host, Deacon Harold Burke-Sivers.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Beacon of Truth. I am your host, Deacon Harold Burke-Sivers, and you're listening on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network. So great to be here with you as always. And on today's show, we're going to talk about something. I'm not afraid to shy away from difficult issues or anything like that. But we're going to talk about the death penalty today. And I'm not going to talk about it from a political standpoint or anything like that. Just from the church's teaching. Obviously there's some controversy with regard to this issue. Some people say we should never ever use the death penalty, but the teaching of the church allows for the use of death penalty. When should we use it? When shouldn't we use it? Again, all from the perspective of the teaching of the church. Again, straying away from politics. So I'm not, it's not a matter of trying to convince you, one way or another politically. It's just a matter of here's what the church teaches, and then we just listen to the church and again, think about the dignity of the human person, but also the state's responsibility to protect its people from aggressors, from harming anyone else. So we'll take a fundamental look at the church's teaching on this very important topic. So if you want to be part of the show today, would love to hear from you today, my friends. Send us an email, beacon@EWTN.com. And one also thing with this issue we're going to look at, because some people say, well, Pope Francis changed the church's teaching on the death penalty. There's a new, there were additions that were made to the catechism of the Catholic Church on this issue. So we'll take a look at that as well. Well, I was checking my emails the other day, and of course, a lot of people know I don't watch television. Sometimes people send me things just so I'm in the know and stuff like that. And someone sent me something recently. I think they saw it or they heard an interview or something that Fred Rogers, or Mr. Rogers, from, a lot of us remember him as kids, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, that he was Catholic. Well, I didn't know that, and I was thinking about who else is Catholic. I know, for example, Chaka Khan, the singer, that she's practicing Catholic. She actually goes into Catholic bookstores and things like that. I know she goes to mass. And I also recently found out that John Petrucci, one of my favorite guitar players, he's a guitar player in the prog metal group Dream Theater, is also Catholic. Did not know that either. So there are people out there in Hollywood and in the music scene who are Catholic. They don't wear it on their sleeve or anything like that, but it's interesting. I'd like to find out, like, Mark Wahlberg, right, is another one. And just recently, there are a couple of high-profile Hollywood actors, that converted to the Catholic faith just recently. I know Patricia Heenan, who played the wife on Everybody Loves Raymond. I know she's Catholic. So it's very interesting. Obviously, Jim Caviezel, not only The Passion of the Christ, but a number of other action adventure movies, is obviously also Catholic. And so it's be interesting to sit down with some of these folks and just chat with them about what their faith means to them. Does it play a role in what songs they sing and what roles they take? Or is it just like, I'm just Catholic just because that's how I grew up? It's be interesting to sit down and chat with some of those folks. But I don't have, I'd love to have someone maybe on the show, but I don't have that kind of pull to be able to, I don't know anybody or have any connections or whatever to get some of those folks here just to sit and talk with them about the impact of the Catholic faith on their life and their careers. Does it really make a difference? So maybe one day I'll get lucky and I'll meet someone that can give me a connection to get them on here. I know their time is valuable, and maybe not the whole show, but maybe whatever time they can spare and just chat. I think it'd be fun and interesting. These people that we see every day and who some of us admire, talking about how the faith shapes their life and their careers, about raising their children and all of that, and it'd be fun to see if they have any commonalities with us, like, issues raising your kids and things like that. And what kind of example did you try to be? Were you able to get the mass? Because sometimes, like, even athletes, right? Athletes or, for example, what's that gymnast? Um, Considered the greatest gymnast of all time, that American gal. She's Catholic. Simone Biles, I think her name is. She's Catholic. So this is just very, very interesting. Um, Again, maybe I'll be lucky enough blessed enough to have a couple of them on the show down the road sometime. But for now, we have also our own series of rock stars who help you bring this show to you every day. I'm talking about Michael McCall, who does social media, Matt Gabinski, who screens our calls, and of course, the one and only Ace McKay, who is the greatest producer in Catholic radio. How you doing, Ace?
I'm good. I don't know that I would be in the midst of that company, but thank you for thinking of me in that level. I did have a chance.
Well, in our world,
Yes.
you're a rock star.
In, what do they say? A celebrity in your own mind.
Yeah.
I did get a chance to meet Jim Caviezel during the promotional tour, I guess you could say, of Passion of the Christ. He was in Nashville during a Christian radio conference, and he was hanging out with Stephen Curtis Chapman. For those who listen to contemporary Christian music, Stephen's, legendary, right? But I had known Stephen from being on my show, doing interviews over the years, and so I ran into him in the lobby of the hotel, and he was walking through the lobby with Jim. And I had also been a huge fan of him from the movie Frequency, so not only Passion of the Christ, but so as a fan, I was like, wow, that's Jim Caviezel right there. But super cool, super nice guy. Like, I feel like we could make that happen. Like, I feel like he's the guy out of anybody on your laundry list. We could make that a beacon of truth reality.
Yeah, I met a couple people. I met Jim Caviezel actually a couple times. One at Mother Angelica's funeral. I had the great honor and privilege of serving as deacon of the Word
Yeah.
at Mother Angelica's funeral. So I met him then. Afterward, there was a huge tent that was set up, and obviously it was hard to get to him because all the nuns were like fangirling all over him, like,
Sure.
you play Jesus.
Yeah.
And then we spoke at a men's conference together in Texas as well. So I met him a couple times. I also met Jonathan Rumi, obviously, who plays Jesus in the Chosen television series.
He was in
I
Indy,
met him
wasn't he?
at the what?
Wasn't he at the Eucharistic Congress with you guys in
Yeah,
Indianapolis?
that's where I met him at the Eucharistic
Yeah.
Congress. Yeah, in the green room, if you will, that they had set
Right.
up backstage. And so I got a chance just to quickly say hello to him before he went out and gave his keynote address
Yeah.
at the Congress. So but I was like, let me get your phone number, guy. I mean, it wasn't anything like that.
I would.
It
I'd be
was
like,
just
hey, man, we'd love to have you on
yeah,
the show. That'd be great.
I mean, yeah, it's like, who are you? I'm not giving you a phone. I don't know who you are, that kind
I'll
of
tell you a
thing,
quick,
but
interesting,
yeah.
a fun celebrity crossing paths, unbeknownst to even thinking it would happen. But so those of us that are 80s hair metal fans, you remember the band Slaughter. So frontman Mark Slaughter
Hmm.
of that band. He lives in Nashville. He's now a voice actor, does a lot of like animation and radio commercials and things. Well, he's also, he's a Christian. He's, been open about his faith and how, he surrendered the rock and roll lifestyle. Now, Slaughter still tours, but much like CeCe DeVille of Poison, like they're trying to find ways to exemplify their faith in their professions to earn their living, right? Well, I was at a Target just in the checkout line, and he was in front of me with his son, and I was doing nights for a radio station there at the time, and come to find out, he and his son used to listen to my show all the time because they loved contemporary Christian music because he was new to the faith. And it was just funny because I'm sitting there thinking, oh my gosh, is that Mark Slaughter? And he turns around and he goes, excuse me, are you Ace McKay? And I'm like, mine was blown in that moment. I'm like, please tell me you're Mark Slaughter. And he goes, yeah. And so we got to talking. And so that was one of the the coolest moments. I'm like, okay, maybe I'm worthy of the green room now. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I love that. That is so awesome. All right. Well, today, my friends, we're talking about the death penalty. Again, we're not looking at it from a political perspective. We're looking at it from what does our church teach about this. So, of course, we would love to hear from you today, my friends. Send us an email, beacon@EWTN.com. Yeah. I love that little hip hop kind of feel of the drums there. That is cool.
Little Dream Theater-esque right there.
Yeah. I saw something hilarious. I watch, I don't watch television, but I do, obviously love music, and I watch a lot of YouTube videos.
Yeah.
And one of them I watch is Drumeo. Even though I'm not a drummer, I appreciate all musicians and the skill that they bring to their instrument. And so part of what they do on that show is that they have a segment where they have these high-level professional drummers come in and listen to songs that they've never heard before and try and with that drumless tracks and try to fill it in. And so Mike Portnoy from Dream Theater was on there, and he was he had never heard this Taylor Swift song.
I saw that clip. Yeah, I saw that clip.
Did you see that? He's trying to play Taylor. I was cracking up, but I love he had at the end of the song, he had a halftime feel. And then I'm like, whoa, that was cool. I mean, his interpretation, I think it was so well done. So much fun.
Yeah, it's really cool to watch drummers interpret because, again, whether they know the song or not, it also shows how much power the drummer really has in the band. Like, watch me change this.
Right. Yeah, the tempo, the feel, everything. I love that. All right, I'm Deacon Harold Burke-Sivers, and you're listening to Beacon of Truth. And today we're going to talk about the death penalty, what the church teaches, why the church teaches what it does. Again, staying away from the political ends of it, but just looking at it from the church's perspective. Of course, would love to hear from you today. Send us an email, beacon@EWTN.com.
Want to remind you, you and your kids can enjoy EWTN Radio with the Kids Faith Adventures, as literally EWTN Kids Faith gives you a chance to not only go through Children's Rosary, Chat Cat, you've got the Friar, lots of great stuff with the Donut Shop, but if you want to get more on that for you and your kids throughout the week, check it out, EWTN.com/kids.
All right, my friends, it's time for us now to explore the Psalms in the Soulful Psalms segment of Beacon of Truth. The Soulful Psalms is where we take the Psalms from the wisdom literature of the Old Testament and we apply them to the everyday lived experience. And this segment of the show, Beacon of Truth, the Soulful Psalms segment, is its own podcast. You can go to EWTN website and go to Podcast Central, or you can listen on the EWTN app. You can even go to your favorite podcast platform such as Spotify, iTunes, SoundCloud, and download and listen to the Soulful Psalms whenever you'd like, as maybe part of your spiritual nourishment for the day. And so I always use the Revised Grail Psalms. It's a newer translation of the Psalms within the last 25 years. It's approved for use in the Mass, and it was put together and prepared by the Benedictine monks of Conception Abbey. Now today we're going to finish looking at Psalm 94. So not, Psalm 94 is in book 4 of the Psalms, Psalms 90 to 106. And like most of the Psalms in this book 4, in this section of the Psalms, there's no attribution. So it doesn't say, like David or the sons of Korah or Asaph or any of the writers. There's no attribution, and there's no prescript or superscript in this psalm as well. So we're going to take a look at the last few verses here, starting at verse 20. So you have your Bibles, open them up. The Psalm 94, again, starting at verse 20. And it says, can judges who do evil be your friends? They do injustice under cover of law. They attack the life of the just and condemn the innocent to death. It's interesting. We're talking about the death penalty today on the show. And here's a psalm that talks about, can judges who do evil be your friends? All right. So you think about our justice system, and, it's supposed to be, you see the scales of justice. You see the statuette of the woman who's blindfolded, and she has the scales of justice, and those scales are equal, equal weight, but she's blind, so justice is blind, but then justice is equal. But sadly, because we are fallen human beings, sometimes the scales of justice can get askew, and sometimes there is corruption or malfeasance or different things like that that's going on within the justice system. Um, and sometimes people get wrongly accused or even wrongly convicted. And so, these are things that we, as people of faith, we should be fighting always for justice. So the psalmist says, can judges who do evil be your friends? Of course not. Well, why? They do injustice under cover of law, right? So Jesus points this out in the sense that the Sadducees and the Pharisees and the scribes and some of those folks, now they were talking about the law and promoting the law, but they weren't living the law. Right? Jesus even says, like, you Pharisees, you brood of vipers, you place heavy burdens on people's back, and you don't want to carry the burden yourself. So they're talking about the law, but they don't align their own selves with law, or with the spirit of the law that underpins what that law is actually trying to say. And sometimes they even commit injustice on the cover of law. For example, the tax collectors, they were maligned and hated by the Jewish people. Why? Because these were Jewish people who were working for the government, for the state, which is the Romans, and they were collecting taxes on behalf of the Romans. And then, which was a legal thing to do. And we still do that to this day. We pay taxes to the government. So the same thing was true back then, except they were taking extra taxes, right? More than what they should have taken, or accepting bribes and things like that. And so Jesus pointed out the hypocrisy as why they were so hated. But he ate with tax collectors and sinners. Back when we talked about the baptism of the Lord, he did not need, of course, he did not need to be baptized because he's God, but he was standing in solidarity with all of those that he came to save, right? And so Zacchaeus, he goes, he was in the tree because Zacchaeus was short and was trying to look at the Lord. The Lord looked up and said, "Come on, Zacchaeus, I'm meeting at your house tonight." And Zacchaeus was so overjoyed that the Lord would chose to spend time with him, that he said, anything I've done wrong, I'm going to give back all the money that I took, and I'm going to make things right. Because that's what happens when you're in the presence of God. Your heart is moved to do the right thing, to do the just thing. But the psalmist here is addressing some of the wrong that he sees with society, particularly those who are supposed to be exemplars of the justice of the law. He said they attack the life of the just and condemn the innocent to death. All right. Not necessarily a parallel with the death penalty per se, except again, We have DNA and other kinds of things now that could either prove someone's guilt or exonerate someone. So, technology can be helpful because the whole thing we want to determine what the truth is. That's the key. We want to determine what the truth is. And so we should use technology to that end so that we don't condemn innocent people to prison or, so that we always try to do what's right for that person. Because, again, all persons, whether they committed crimes or not, are reserved the dignity and the respect because they're still made in the image and likeness of God. So we have to be conscious of that, but also understand that if someone did something wrong, that they, in a sense, lost their innocence and need to be punished for that because that's the just and the right thing to do. And the psalm continues here. As for me, the Lord will be a stronghold. Right? So again, they're not going to participate in this corruption. They recognize what's going on around them, and that ultimately the just judge is God. Right? So even though these other things are going on in society, the ultimate just judge is the Lord. And so the Lord, therefore, is going to be my stronghold. I'm going to place myself under God's judgment. My God will be the rock where I take refuge. Right? Not seeking refuge necessarily in the tenets and the beliefs and the teachings of the culture, but taking refuge in God's mercy, in God's strength, and in God's justice.
Yeah, and I think anytime we've done something that we know, whether it's legal or just in life in general, to think about the fact of God rebuilding our reputation based on who we are in Him is much better than us trying to convince people of, oh, I've changed, or I'm no longer living that lifestyle, or I'm no longer doing those, actions or selling those illegal things. But that's the thing I love is that Him rebuilding our reputation has far more merit than anything that anyone else could say or think of us.
Yeah, so true. And that's a great point, especially for, prisoners or those who were incarcerated who come out, who served their time,
Yeah.
who admitted what they did was wrong and they served their time and now they're coming back and try to reestablish themselves in society. And often it's difficult to do.
Yeah.
Because they can't find a job because no one's going to hire a felon,
Mm-hmm.
because they don't want to take a chance that the person could reoffend and things like that. So, but we should create opportunities for folks like that. In Portland here, in Oregon here, there's what's it called? Dave's something bread. It's a bread company,
Yeah.
and they're known for hiring felons and ex-cons to give them a chance. I know Father Leo Patalinghung with his food truck often hires ex-cons, people coming out of prison to reestablish themselves. And there are other places too that also hire people who are incarcerated,
Hmm.
to give them an opportunity to get their lives back together again. Again, it's not about judging people. Again, there are certain crimes, obviously, being around children and vulnerable and things like that, we want to be careful of. But at the same time, again, we still have to recognize the dignity of every single human person.
Amen.
And the psalmist ends here in the last line. He will repay them for their wickedness, destroy them for their evil deeds. The Lord our God will destroy them. Okay, so again, the psalmist here is taking a little bit of liberty here and saying that the Lord will destroy them. No, what the Lord is going to allow is for the natural consequences of their actions and their decisions to play out. All right, so again, very strong language here, but again, our God is ultimately a God of love. Well, we're talking about the death penalty today, my friends. We'd love to hear from you. Send us an email, beacon@EWTN.com.
I can hear Angus Young all in that.
Yeah, there you go. I was just thinking that. In fact, I had him in my mind doing this. that
Right.
rocking back and forth that he does when he plays with those crazy shorts and that hat.
Oh, I know.
Talk about signature, man. Like as soon as you hear that or you see that, you know exactly who that is and what band he plays
And
for.
keep
Love
that in mind. If you're an up-and-coming musician, have a style, have a look. Don't just get up there in like a cutoff shirt and your jammy pants. Like nothing's worse to me than it just looks like they rolled out of bed. That's not rock and roll. That's not professionalism. Like be unique to your style and then present so people go, man, I remember you. You look, Anyway, I digress.
Yeah. And now that was huge in the 70s. When they had the whole glam rock era.
Yeah.
For example, Queen used to wear those, those costumes with the, they lift up their arms as like these wings underneath and stuff. And
Yep.
David Bowie was
Sure.
another. Elton John. A lot of those performers had costumes and stuff that kind of added to the aura
Yep.
of their performances as well.
So true.
It made it memorable for people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I love that. All right. Well, I'm Deacon Harold Burke-Sivers, and you're listening to Beacon of Truth. And today we're talking about the death penalty. Again, stay away from the political aspects of it and just focusing on what the church teaches about this often controversial issue. So I'd love to hear from you today, my friends. Send us an email, beacon@EWTN.com.
I want to remind you can participate in the Mass as each and every morning, 8 Eastern on EWTN Radio. We bring you the sacrifice of the Mass from Our Lady of the Angels Chapel live. And, of course, you can subscribe at EWTN.com when you click the subscribe button and get in on the daily Mass readings.
All right. Awesome. Well, the Catholic tradition teaches that human dignity can be protected and a healthy community can be achieved only if basic human rights are protected and the responsibilities that come with those rights are also met, right? Because there's rights and then there's duties or responsibilities. So you just don't have a right to something. With those rights come duties and certain responsibilities that have to be met so that the dignity of the human person can be protected. So every person has a fundamental right to life and a right for human decency, right? This is why we protect the unborn and the elderly and the vulnerable as a kind of fundamental tenet of our Catholic belief and faith. Uh, so we have this responsibility, obviously, to the larger society, not just to our own faith and to our own community, but to society as a whole. Now, with regard to the death penalty, what does the church teach about this? So the church recognizes that the state, now again, meaning the country, not right, like the state, like United 50 states, but the state, the country itself, um, has an obligation and responsibility to protect the people that are under uh, uh, that are part of that country. That they have a right to protect them from people who commit uh, crimes and certain atrocities, so that there could be civil coexistence, that people can just live together, and go about their lives and helping society to run freely and efficiently. And so, so the state has an obligation, responsibility to seek the common good, right? To do things and enact laws which were helpful to everyone within society. So, also in that vein, the church recognizes that public authority has the right and the duty, because remember, there's responsibilities and duties that come with rights, to also to place penalties on people who commit crimes that are commensurate with the gravity of the crime. So in order to basically to redress the wrong that was done. Uh, so um, so when this punishment involves typically time in jail. So what you've done by committing this particular act, the state is saying you have given up your fundamental right to exist in society for a particular amount of time, and therefore the person is taken out of society and placed within jail, a kind of almost like its own kind of society, if you will, and the purpose of that is to, in a sense, uh, pay for the crime that they committed. But also, the other piece that we often forget about is what's called retributive justice. We're going to talk about that uh, more deeply in a few minutes. But we should also, incarceration should be designed to contribute to the correction of the offender. All right. So not just a punishment for the crime they committed, but also looking to somehow change that behavior so the person can, when they're released, can function as a productive citizen within society. All right. Uh, so again, the focus is on protecting the common good, which means that people that commit crimes, particularly person crimes or violent crimes or felony crimes, the state has to make sure that that person is unable to inflict harm on anyone else. Okay, so that's what the prison system and incarceration is for. So again, from a faith perspective, we see as the primary effect of punishment is to redress the disorder caused by the offense, right? That's what we mean by retributive justice, okay? Not revenge, but retributive justice. That is a term you're going to hear me mention several times throughout the show today. So we have to really a clear understanding of what that is. Again, one of the main purposes for incarceration is separating someone from society, from civil society, for a particular amount of time, is to redress the disorder caused by the offense. All right. So again, serves as a punishment for what they did, but also an opportunity to to form their conscience in a way so they can live peacefully with everyone. Right. So that's a fundamental tenet of of separating someone from society for a time. Um, now, assuming that the person is actually, like, if the person commits a heinous crime, where murder, where they deliberately, consciously, deliberately take someone's life. Now we're not talking about manslaughter here, which is, for example, um, drunk driving, and you hit someone and you kill them. As that is horrible. That's tragic. The person needs to be punished for that, but it's not murder in the sense that they did not intend for that to happen. They were driving. They were hoping to get home, and because they engaged in an act that was irresponsible, they could or should have known that this particular action was going to cause harm to someone. All right. Murder is when they deliberately, I knowingly, with forethought, planned this out. I knew I was going to do this, and I knew the person was going to die. Now, assuming a person in that committed murder, is actually guilty, because we talked about, a few minutes ago, about how some people are wrongly convicted, but assuming that the person did it, the church does teach that the state has recourse. It doesn't exclude the death penalty as a way of retributive justice. If, again, here's the important part, if this is the only possible way to effectively defend human lives against an unjust aggressor. All right. Again, let me say that again, because that's key. Has, again, nothing to do with politics. The church says that the state can, it doesn't have to, but it has the ability to use the death penalty because the person, again, is not innocent. But you may be saying, well, what about the fourth command or the fifth commandment, thou shalt not kill? All right. So the word there in Hebrew is raksa, ratzach. And ratzach means innocent life. Okay. So you are not to take innocent life. So if you're in war, or if someone breaks into your house and tries to hurt your family, and you defend yourself and your family, that's not innocent life, because the person that committed or attempt to commit a crime against you is not innocent. All right. So that's what that commandment is talking about. Ratzak again. So, but the state says if this is the only way to effectively defend human lives against an unjust aggressor. Now, you may be thinking, well, in our society, our modern society today, when is that ever the case? You know, so the church should say we should always consider non-lethal means, especially in our society, our modern society today, as a sufficient way to defend and protect people and protect the safety of the common good from an aggressor. All right. So locking someone in jail for life, not putting them to death, but life in prison without the possibility of getting out, could be a way that we can do that. You know, in fact, the church teaches in the catechism that the again, this is I mean, I'm talking about the catechism before the changes that Pope Francis talked about. We're going to talk about those. The church taught even prior to Pope Francis that the case of given our modern system now in the world today, that the cases in which the execution of an offender is absolutely necessary are very rare, if not practically non-existent. All right, so this is before Pope Francis. All right, the execution of an offender is being absolutely necessary to protect the common good and to maintain a civil society. That should be very rare, if not practically non-existent. Because think about it: when is there a time when a person in prison can still harm and inflict danger? Now, um, from a law enforcement perspective, I know there may be cases where you have a someone from a drug cartel or from the mafia or something like that who are in prison, and they're still giving orders or through the communications to carry out certain acts of violence against other people. You know, so so if that person, so that person may fall under the category of that rare exception. But again, I mean that we see a lot of stuff on television. But we're talking about real life here. Again, this is even the scenario that I just mentioned with the drug cartels and the mafia bosses and stuff. That's exceedingly rare. That something like that happens in our culture today. So now, again, we make the distinction between revenge, which is when someone does something evil to you and you repay them in kind, right? So eye for an eye, right? We see that in the Old Testament. As opposed to retributive justice, we have to make the distinction. That's revenge, doing evil to someone who does evil to you, eye for an eye, or retributive justice, which is an act of mercy. It is when you tell the person who did evil to you that they have to rectify the wrong that they did, right? And this is the a very important point that the church makes because it affirms the constant teaching of the church and affirms the legitimacy again in very rare circumstances for the use of the death penalty. So retributive justice is not revenge; it's an act of mercy in which the person who did wrong rectifies the wrong that they have done. All right. So retributive justice is not revenge. All right. Retributive justice is not revenge. So I'm Deacon Harold Burke Sivers. You're listening to Beacon of Truth, and today we're talking about the death penalty. Very, difficult issue to talk about, but important. And we need to understand these things in our culture from a faith perspective. Would love to hear from you today, my friends. Send us an email, beacon at EWTN.com. Okay. And so now, hopefully, you have the basic format, the kind of basic foundation for understanding retributive justice versus revenge. The church is teaching that the state has the ability to use the death penalty, but does not have to use the death penalty. All right. So, how is the death penalty retributive justice and not revenge? Because if the person commits a homicide, then you put them on death row because eye for an eye. That's what it seems like. All right. So what's the difference? So the natural law, again, which is that part of God's eternal law, right? that's placed in the heart of every single human being, where we can come to know God by reason alone. And the fundamental principle of the natural law is do good and avoid evil. Right. So that fundamental tenet of the natural law and our Christian faith uh, tells us that the desire for revenge, that is part of, I mean, that's just part of our nature as human beings, that this concupiscence, this tendency to choose that which is not good, right? It says do good and avoid evil. But sometimes our emotions, sometimes the nature of our fallen nature, sometimes that takes over. So we have to, with the grace of Christ and the cooperation with the grace of the sacraments, we have to kind of put that to the side. And the primary way we do that is through acts of forgiveness, right? Acts of merciful love and forgiveness. I will never forget being in the courtroom, and this was a guy who actually, I mean, he was committed this very heinous homicide, and I was there uh, when he was sentenced, and the mother of the young woman that he killed got up, and because it was what they call a victim impact statement. So this is when, before the judge issues his sentence to the person, the members of the family of the person whose life was taken get up and make a statement to the court. And so the mother got up there and made this statement, and it was really something. It's one thing to say and call yourself a Christian. It's another thing to publicly witness to that. And she talked about her daughter and how she misses her daughter and some beautiful things. But then she talked about how she forgave the person who took her daughter's life. And I was like, I mean, look, that's deep right there. I mean, that's a very public witness of someone who's living their faith, not just paying lip service to it. And she sincerely said that she, forgave him. She talked about, I mean, my faith says that God says you have to forgive. And Jesus even says that in the Our Father, right? The perfect prayer, because it's the prayer that comes from Jesus himself, where he says, forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. That God will only forgive our sins and our transgressions to the extent that we're willing to forgive others. And remember what Jesus says, we have to forgive from the heart. That's really hard because of the emotions and the memories and the anger and the resentment that builds up in our hearts because someone we love was taken from us. We want to see that person suffer the way that our loved ones suffered. That's our impulse. That's the concupiscence that's working. But we have to quell that. To say that we need to do. Yeah, the person needs to pay for what they did. They need to understand that what they did was wrong, but we also need to forgive. And this idea of retributive justice is about mercy and forgiveness, right? Again, this is the hard concept for us in our culture today, but this is just a fundamental principle of what it means and what it means to live out and act as a person of faith. So forgiveness does not mean that we don't have to use the death penalty, by the way. If the death penalty is used, um, which again the state enacts it, it has to do everything in its power to encourage the citizenry to distinguish between revenge and retributive justice. So whatever the state does has to encourage people to forgive. Why? Because that helps build a virtuous society. All right. Um, the state uh if the state says, well, this person's going to die, and coming from it from a revenge standpoint, basically then that becomes like the family becomes like a cheerleading squad. Yeah, eye for an eye. You killed my loved one, therefore you're going to die. And you see a lot of anger and vitriol. you know um and when the state does that, it's encouraging the opposite of what should be done. It's encouraging a spirit of revenge, whereas it should be encouraging forgiveness alongside retributive justice. All right, alongside retributive justice. So again, these are principles that we need to take into account. All right. Um, where does this come from? Where's kind of the biblical foundation for this? In Genesis chapter 9, verse 6, it says, "Whoever sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed. For God made man in his own image." Right? So humanity the state have been given responsibilities by God to take care of its citizenry. And so there's actually a biblical foundation for the implementation and use of the death penalty. All right. Now, that doesn't mean that someone, when they lost their innocence and they lost their freedom by being incarcerated, doesn't mean they lose their dignity as a human person. No one can ever lose their dignity as a human person, because we always have to see them made in the image and likeness of God. Yeah, you can act contrary to that dignity, but you can never lose that dignity. Again, this is what retributive justice, not revenge, what retributive justice reminds us of, these fundamental principles of our faith. So when a person loses their innocence by committing a heinous crime, they need to rebalance the scales, right? In a sense, to repay for what they did. Um, uh, so, so that, again, in our culture today, that means incarceration. They've lost their freedom, their lost ability to live in a civil society, at least for a time. So what is the change then that Pope Francis made? Because some people say, that Pope Francis took away the ability of the state, or says that the state should no longer be using the death penalty. Here's what the change that Pope Francis made. He says the death penalty is inadmissible because it is an attack on the inviolability and dignity of the person. Right. This is the change in the catechism that Pope Francis inserted. He says that the church has to work with determination for its abolition, the abolition of the death penalty worldwide. All right. So again, even stronger language here: the death penalty is inadmissible because it is an attack against the inviolability of the human person, and the church should work for its abolition worldwide. Now, this is a departure from the catechism that was approved by John Paul II, who says that the previous language said, assuming that a guilty party's identity and responsibility have been fully determined, the traditional teaching of the church does not exclude recourse to the death penalty, again, if it is the only possible way of effectively defending human lives against an unjust aggressor. So what Pope Francis is saying is kind of taking it a step further. Um, so St. John Paul II said that, if this is again, very careful language here, if it's the only possible way of defending human lives from an unjust aggressor, Pope Francis say, well, there's never a case where, you know, uh, 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 the death penalty can be used, because there's no scenario that he foresees where death penalty is the only way of defending human lives. Right. So that's kind of the Pope's take on it. So the previous formula in the Catechism does stipulate that if non-lethal means are sufficient to protect people's safety from an aggressor, then authority must limit itself to keeping within these conditions of the common good and conformity to the dignity of the human person. Okay, so that should be the first and foremost consideration. Again, the Catechism, uh, uh, prior to um, Pope Francis, in fact, even in Evangelium Vitae, the Gospel of Life, John Paul II's wonderful document, again says that the use of the death penalty is very rare, if not practically if not practically non-existent. Right. So this was, again, so Pope Francis not teaching anything away from what the church was teaching. And again, The state, as an instrument of God, articulating that natural moral law as part of human or positive law, has the right but not the duty to engage in retributive justice using the death penalty if someone has lost their innocence. All right. So, important things to talk about. We don't shy away from difficult things here on Beacon of Truth. Now, remember, you can stream today's show by visiting Podcast Central at EWTN.com/radio. So EWTN.com/radio, and you can go to Podcast Central to listen to this show again. And until we are together again, my friends, may Almighty God bless you, keep you and protect you, the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. Amen.